to this week's episode of our Summer 2025 Breaking the Ice podcast series. I'm Jessica Shadian, President and CEO of Arctic 360, Canada's national Arctic think tank and one of this summer's co-hosts. Well, as the summer sun slowly sets and construction season ramps up before winter, it seems apt to spend this episode talking about what Canadians are certain we need but hate to live through: building infrastructure. In June, Canada passed the new Building Canada Act as part of the broader One Canadian Economy Act. The now new Projects Office will expedite determined nation-building infrastructure projects to enhance Canada's prosperity, security, and defense. The projects, they range from highways to railways, ports, airports, and critical minerals. And specific to the Arctic, the focus is on dual-use nation-building projects to address Canada's Arctic sovereignty and security goals, meet local community needs, while unlocking critical minerals and the North's economic potential. I do not think it's going out on a limb to say that the massive critical infrastructure gap in Canada's north is well known. The Arctic nation-building projects, a priority, are Northern and Indigenous government and business-led, focused on dual-use projects that basically meet the needs of the North while strengthening Canada's defense and security, and connecting the North to the rest of Canada and to global markets. Yet, if the proposed projects are going to contribute to Canada's prosperity, defense, and national security, well, then the infrastructure built must be equipped to meet the technological needs of today and be future-proof for tomorrow. And this is where we focus our conversation today: the needs and or potential for building smart infrastructure in Canada's Arctic. It's a topic that has not been the focus of Arctic nation building infrastructure projects, but perhaps most certainly should be. Today's modern infrastructure is increasingly sensor-embedded, automated, and connected. And as far as future-proofing goes, while the up-and-coming new generation of social trade and defense infrastructure will most certainly require being sensored, automated, and part of the overall Internet of Things ecosystem. This, of course, entails having the ability to collect a whole lot of data, having places to store that data, and in the case of the North, this includes adequate access to energy and high-speed internet. Yet not least, if Canada's Arctic nation-building projects are to strengthen Canada's defense, much less security and its prosperity as well, then it also requires Canada having sovereignty over its own data. So, to unpack and help us understand what all of this means, we have with us three guests who basically spend their professional days immersed in this very subject. So, Madeleine Redfern, the Executive Director of the Northern Branch of Arctic 360, but for interest for today's discussion, she is CEO of SednaLink Marine Systems. And we're also joined by Lyle Fabian. Lyle is the CEO of KatloTech Communications Limited. And finally, Captain Singh, who's Vice President Marine for PortsToronto. So to start, I'm going to turn it over to Mishal and Jaiden, our co-hosts, to introduce themselves and take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jaiden Stevens, and I'm joining you today from Northern Wells in the Northwest Territories, where I run my own digital media business focusing on Northern stories and storytelling here in the North.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mishal. I'm a master's student at the Monk School of Global Affairs at the University of Toronto. I am an international student from Pakistan, and this is my first year in Toronto. So without further ado, let's go over a quick round of introductions.
Thank you, Mishal. I am Captain Satinder Singh, Vice President Marine at PortsToronto. I have over 20 years of operational maritime leadership experience. My background is I was a Queen's Harbour Master with Department of National Defense, which included service at Canadian Forces Maritime Experimental and Test Ranges on the West Coast. Currently, before this role, I was Vice President Operations and Harbour Master, and then I'm a Port Authority, and now I'm Vice President Marine here. I'm a champion for smart maritime technologies in favor.
So I'm an Inuk, originally from Inuit, the capital of Nunavut, and I am the COO of CanArctic Inuit Networks and CEO of SednaLink Marine Systems. I started getting involved in major infrastructure in Canada's north, especially in the areas of telecommunications, digital infrastructure, as well as energy and or transportation, in part because of the state of that type of infrastructure. We are the only region in Canada that does not have fiber optic networks, and we're 100% diesel dependent. There are no roads in and out of the territory. It's only fly in or short shipping season. So we lag significantly behind the rest of Canada, and especially with, not only needing to improve connectivity for our residents, our businesses, we also need to improve connectivity to provide appropriate security and defense, not only for Canada's Arctic regions, but actually for the whole entire country and our citizens of North America.
Thank you, Madeleine.
Lyle, Fabian. Basically, I'd like to really thank everybody for allowing me to talk here. KatloTech Communications, I'm Dene from Northwest Territories, originally from KatloTech First Nation. KatloTech is an Indigenous-owned telecom company based in Yellowknife, and we also work out through many provinces. And basically, right now, what we're currently concentrating on is a 329-kilometer fiber optic build. As I said, we, myself and Light Access and their engineering team drove the route to start pricing out and looking at building a new fiber optic build to bring redundancy to the Northwest Territories. And how I got into this whole thing was basically just in 2011 building our first fiber optic project with KatloTech First Nation that they still own till this day. And basically, the idea is that, we wanted to close the digital divide for the community, create various and different opportunities for the Indigenous community, and also strengthen northern infrastructure. That if we ourselves, are waiting for telecom companies to bring infrastructure, we're always on a dependency side. And so therefore, ownership of infrastructure, should always be the goal of Indigenous communities, especially in the North. And it's about building resilience and fostering economic growth and ensuring, this new thing that everybody seems to be talking about, data sovereignty. And so, that's basically what we're concentrating on and have been concentrating on since my first project laying fiber for KatloTech in 2011.
I want to give one speak really quickly about your data center project.
The fiber, the 329, 288 strand fiber optic cable is mainly for our 20,000 square foot data center to be hosted on KatloTech First Nation. That is about, looking at long-term sustainable economic growth for the region and also showing, that data center technology, hosted in cold climates is more economically sustainable than having to, have these data centers in the south where they rely heavily on power, cooling, and water to keep them cool. We live in a cold climate region, and the only thing that we need, for the region is that we already have power, which is hydro. And so we now have to lay the fiber. And now that we have a data center that's solely run on hydro and our own fiber optic network to bring connectivity and wholesale broadband to the north. But at the same time, we want to use to show everybody that, that the north is probably going to be the best place for data center technology if you can bring both, renewable energy solutions. And so that's the goal and potential. And what we want to do is we want to take a look at nation building projects, under the KatloTech umbrella of several companies we have.
Yeah, Madeleine, maybe there's a good time though also for you to give a little overview of your fiber project.
Yeah, so I agree in so much as that where we do not have adequate telecommunications services, it's really important for Indigenous peoples to look at options where we can effectively build our own networks, especially the backbone. Everything from the first mile to the last mile. So CanArctic Inuit Networks was created in part because we recognized that there was such a dire need. The quality of communications to our region was through GEOs, which is our satellite based, and it was slow, it was inconsistent, it was unreliable, it was extremely expensive, and it made it incredibly difficult for our residents, our businesses, even our governments to be able to sort of just do the regular type of online activities, from sending, receiving emails to doing online applications. let alone try to do something like gaming. And often the satellite would go down, and literally it would mean that, there was no communications in or out of our territory. So you could find yourself not only not being able to receive or send emails, but not even being able to pay for your groceries at the cashier or pay for your gas at the gas station. And at times it also put our people at risk, because if you had to, call the fire station because there was a fire. I mean, I was mayor for the city of Iqaluit, and I saw a fire, of a residential unit in my community. And the only way to sort of notify the fire department was to drive there. And or similarly with the police, will sometimes say, well, our comms are down. And again, people are expected to go to the detachment when and if they need the services of police, which is, absolutely puts people at risk. If you're in a domestic violence situation or someone is having a medical emergency, it literally puts people's lives at risk. So we needed something better. And fiber literally is the best, sort of type of communications with respect to throughput, the sheer volume of data. We were the only Canadian capital in the country that had no fiber access. So, try to imagine running a capital city, capital that not only sort of serves its community, but residents, but also the entire region, and for a territorial government to fulfill its obligations, through all its various departments. It's The goal is to construct subsea cable from Newfoundland, connect also Labrador into Iqaluit, but also up along the east coast of Baffin Island, through the Northwest Passage, as well as connect effectively to the fiber that exists in Northwest Territories. You've got fiber into Inuvik. There's fiber into Alaska as well. There is a fiber system in northern Quebec, Ophone. You want to connect there as well, and ideally connect the communities of the Quebec region, which are on the east coast of Hudson Bay, and connect that also into the Churchill network, because you do want as much redundancy as possible. It strengthens not only, the SednaLink network, but it would also, provide redundancy for those other networks. It's been very challenging with some of the Government of Canada policies or programs which didn't support redundancy. And or believe that only one network can and should be built. Thankfully, most of the world and the rest of southern Canada recognizes you need more than one network, and more than one network owner in order to sort of build out the necessary systems. And maybe briefly, I'll just add is that there is an opportunity to have certain segments of the network to have sensors. We know that there is a lack of marine data in Canada's Arctic. So climate change is happening, but we don't even have baseline data. And you want to be able to sort of see, what is happening. Are there changes to temperature, salinity, pressure, currents? Those changes are actually happening, but we're not really understanding, other than from our hunters or fishermen and people who are sort of like noticing those changes, but without necessarily the scientific data. And lastly, the reason why you want sensors in strategic areas is for Arctic security reasons. You want to know what's in the water. Are there submarines? Are there unmanned, drones? Sometimes called remote operating vehicles. And because we know that there are incursions that are happening into our North American waters, but satellites can't always detect that. And so you do want to have, all that real-time data. And the only way to get real-time data consistently, because it's the sheer volume of information in real time is through fiber. So we're still pushing, quite hard to ensure that our region gets connected. There's thankfully, finally after almost 15 years, a growing understanding and awareness of the necessity of this infrastructure, but it should be strategic. The routing and the ownership and who, has access to that network, because data is flowing through it. That data must be protected. Not anyone and everyone, you want access of that data, from your bad actors. So again, sort of understanding the procurement process and the timing, the cost, and having the right experts build it. And of course, the last thing is that many of our Indigenous leaders in the North and in the South is, nothing about us without us. We need to own our critical infrastructure. It makes a lot of economic sense. It produces, benefits back to our communities and back to our people, rather than seeing, sort of the North being poorly served, underserved, and overcharged, which is what the situation has been for far too long.
Madeleine, this is great. I was just listening to you, and I feel like there's a lot of synergy in some of the things that I have been thinking about in terms of smart data and, how there should be sufficient Arctic-based sensors, a reliable satellite coverage you talked about, and data analysis platforms are also required, right? And I worked in CF Meter, like I said previously, where we kind of used technology to really understand what was happening in the water, and not just on surface, but subsurface. And when we're talking about subsurface, we're talking about the habitat that exists and the impact of navigation and commercial interest on those things. So, totally agree with you. We need to, tailor the need of the Arctic, which is sovereignty, environmental monitoring, and security, and it has to be a collaborative effort. Co-governance is a great model where federal government with Indigenous stakeholders could really partner and move that needle forward. And when I think about PortsToronto and I think about our triple role here, we are the economic engine for the trade and growth. We are environmental stewards. We balance the development and sustainability initiatives within our port. I don't know, Mishal, you must have heard we had the first electric plane fly out of Billy Bishop Airport. It was all over the news in Toronto. So we are really reimagining what that transportation means. And we are the strategic hub supporting national priorities for the city of Toronto, the region of Ontario, and Canada as a whole. So from my perspective, the lessons that we could maybe use from the southern ports to help north is, climate adaptation strategies, relevant to the Arctic change, melting of ice caps, and its impact on the commercial routes, which are going to become very viable in the future. Everybody's going to be looking at the Arctic as a shortcut or a route that is going to move their cargo faster and, supplement the supply chain redundancies that we need. Digitization we talked about for operational efficiency and monitoring. And then the dual use infrastructure for both civilian and defense applications. So there's a huge part to play here as well with the geopolitical impact we are seeing with different nations and instability. It almost feels like stability is a luxury at this present time and moment in time, right? So I'll leave it at that.
Can I just add, a couple things? One is the reason why I'm also interested in energy is that we actually can't build out our telecommunications infrastructure without having energy. And diesel, makes it incredibly hard to support, the type of digital and telecommunication infrastructure that we want, not just with respect to fiber networks, but also with respect to ground stations and data centers. So you do want to absolutely, sort of have a parallel strategy on energy and telecommunications at the same time. And, while I appreciate and agree that there's a lot of, important lessons to learn, in Canada from what is happening in the South, there's also important lessons to learn from our other Arctic nation neighbors. What are they doing? So we see Greenland has deployed that type of strategy where they have, made significant investments with Denmark, to bring in 2 fiber optic cables to, they have their 6 hydroelectric dam, coming on, and it's abundant energy. They're not sort of, just building an energy solution for what we need today. They're building infrastructure and energy, abundance so that it actually powers, the infrastructure needed for the next 50 years. We're seeing, expansions on airports and seaports. They have the opportunity to effectively now, move to the next level, which is the data centers, to do edge computing. The necessity of being able to sort of process that data, in the north is beneficial for multiple reasons. One, it's a cool environment, which is absolutely, beneficial because data centers are extremely power hungry and getting power, and even more so, and they're incredibly hot. So, being in the Arctic is beneficial, but also all that real time, all domain awareness, knowing what's happening, from space to seabed requires a lot of computing and processing and AI. So you definitely do want to be processing that data, primarily in the Arctic, because every second matters. It's about sort of detecting, threats, whether it's missiles coming over the pole or submarines or unmanned drones in the marine environment. So it's cheaper, to move a gigabit of data than a gigawatt of energy. So you do want to have sort of, those solutions happening. So absolutely, we have an opportunity to build a smart Arctic in Canada. The only thing that is really hindering us is knowing, how to do it, where to do it, and how much it costs, and who should, effectively own that infrastructure. So and again, maybe I'll just do a quick pitch to Arctic 360 is, that's partly why Arctic 360 is really pushing hard, is to create this online interactive map, an inventory of all existing infrastructure, and then being able to sort of, play with that tool to, like SimCity, so you can actually see where, if you build a power solution, and you make it only 5 megawatts, well, you'll find out very quickly that it doesn't allow you to do things like data centers. And or, what is the energy requirements for fiber optic cables? What are the, energy requirements for mines, and where are their synergies? So there's a lot of opportunity that can be unlocked. But unfortunately, right now, the way that Canada has been developing the Arctic or investing in the Arctic is not as strategic as it could be. It looks at a single isolated project, without all the considerations and where, those investments literally could be transformative, and not only for today, as I said, for the next 50 years.
That's right. And one of the things, why our project really matters is that, our goal is about closing the digital divide for many communities, because a lot of the communities in all three territories, pay probably one of the highest telecom rates in Canada while receiving unreliable service, which can everybody knows. Our project creates, the ability of our fiber optic and data center project, will create fair competition, lower the costs, expand access to for residents, businesses, and public safety organizations. And at the same time, we're looking at national security and sovereignty. Canada's northern infrastructure is very fragile, and Northwest Tel and other companies and Bell, would highly contest, say, we have redundancy. But, it's highly vulnerable to outages. And by adding independent routes and secure data center hosting, we provide redundancy not only for the military, but also potentially for the RCMP and other critical government communications, and strengthening the sovereignty in strategically important regions such as the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Nunavut. And the other part of it, we're not doing this because it's a great idea. We're doing it because of the economic growth that we see in a data center technology to be hosted in the north. This project is Indigenous led, privately owned by KatloTech Communications. I want to bring meaningful wealth and jobs and long-term ownership in the north. It aligns with federal priorities of economic reconciliation, regional equality, and sustainable development. And also, one of the biggest things that we're looking at is, green innovation, such as, working with existing hydro, solar, hydrogen backup generators. Icebox Data Center offers one of the most lowest cost and greenest energy footprint that we've seen out there for our project in North America in all cloud hosting technologies that currently exist today. And this positions the North as a global player for sustainable digital infrastructure. And at the same time, strong industry partnerships. KatloTech has partnered with Noramco, one of Canada's largest telecom suppliers, which already committed millions of dollars in investments to this project. For us to build, a fiber optic link between northern Alberta into the Northwest Territories. And at the same time, people are asking us, why are you putting 288 strands? Well, because 288 strands. What we want to do is we want to future-proof, the ability of world-class fiber infrastructure, reliable supply chains, and proven industry practices. And so why the federal government's support for our project is very essential is that, it's not just about nation building. Federal support ensures that the North, won't be left behind, in the digital future. Investment in policy and backing from Ottawa, will guarantee redundancy for Canada's Arctic communications, unlocking economic opportunities for Indigenous communities, protect Canadian data from foreign jurisdictional risks, and at the same time demonstrate to Canada's commitment to reconciliation and sovereignty in the North. And so basically, why data sovereignty, really matters is that we need Canadian control. Too much of Canada is hosting in the US, making it subject to the US Cloud Act, which allows foreign authorities to access data even without Canadian consent. Indigenous jurisdiction hosting on Indigenous land adds a layer of protection, as Indigenous legal frameworks and governance can provide additional barriers against unwanted access to Canadian-based technology and information. National security, sensitive communications from RCMP, military, and federal agencies need to be housed on Canadian-owned data center operated facilities, not Google and Amazon and Microsoft that, yes, they say they are, hosted in Canada, but really the US Cloud Act allows the US government to access that information without any government oversight. And so that is the main reason why we're doing what we're doing, is we're really talking about keeping data storage and processing it inside in the North, creates jobs, generates revenue for Indigenous communities, and also prevents wealth from flowing from Canada to the US.
So on the subject of national security, I think I want to steer this conversation towards Captain. If you could share from your experience, what do you think are the biggest national security risks associated with foreign entities controlling infrastructure and data, as well as the general cybersecurity risks attached to it?
Thank you, Mishal. I'd like to bring to everybody's attention the Bill C-8 that has just been formulated. The part one of it talks about the Telecommunications Act, and the second part is on cybersecurity. So this bill is, I think, of a very futuristic view by the government of Canada to really look at that future that we are foreseeing. And I totally agree with everybody here. Indigenous communities are already the frontline observers in the Arctic. We already have infrastructure that we are developing and growing. So there needs to be, in my mind, a shared governance model, which is Indigenous communities and federal government sharing and owning those platforms together. And like we talked about, and not being shared somewhere. No, you don't agree with it? Okay.
I don't agree with that.
Okay. So
Back to that
please.
question. Yeah. Well, we
Yeah.
can go ahead, finish, and then we'll have a discussion on that, perhaps. Yeah.
All right. So, my belief is that collaboratively we can solve a lot of problems. We can't do them in isolation, and I'm a firm believer of that, being a previous public servant and now in the commercial industry. And okay, fair enough. So, I do recognize the traditional knowledge and the strategic intelligence. I'm not discounting that, and I believe that Indigenous sovereignty supports the Canadian sovereignty. So that's the way I think about it, or reframe it in my mind. And making a business case for the Arctic ports and making it self-sustainable is another piece that I think about. So when you think about that, the real-time data from these Arctic interests could have a commercial value. I know that ice forecasting, weather data, environmental information, these are all important initiatives that people value and private interests value. It attracts interest from insurers, shipping companies. You have research institutions that are thinking about those things. So all that could be commercialized, and we could become a data broker nation in that respect, right? So that public-private partnership, I think, is very crucial moving forward. I don't think one person or one entity can solve the problem. I think it takes a village, and from that perspective, I think that collaboration is the key piece. From my perspective, Michelle, you asked a question about security in the Arctic. Federal government has a leading role to play in that, working with other nations and really understanding who owns what areas or who has control and management of those areas. Currently, there's a lot of different opinions about who owns the Arctic and who owns the data and resources in the Arctic. So how we support that and how we work together, I think, is the key moving forward. That is really going to have the huge the most impact in my mind. And we have to invest in the Arctic. There's no question about it. Those technologically advanced systems that we need to really censor the seabeds, to have drones surveilling our airspace, and also having ROVs or remote operated vehicles that can really support the infrastructural development and provide AI forecast for proper maintenance and sustainability of those infrastructure projects that we may be looking at in the Arctic.
Would you say are the examples of dual-use digital infrastructure?
So when I worked in Canadian Forces Maritime Experimental Test Range, we had an arrayed seabed whereby we would utilize the information that was provided to us to support environmental monitoring as well. So that is a dual use in a commercial environment, and also for the sovereignty of the data and also security of the data in the defense mechanism.
So maybe I could just also jump in. There are a number of fiber optic cables where there are fiber pairs that are specifically only available to the military. So, sort of black fiber or dark fiber. There's also at times where the military may sort of through agreement take over the fiber when they're doing a very sensitive exercise. So fiber is an incredibly sort of important sort of piece of infrastructure, but so is satellite. I want to make sure that I don't come across as anti-satellite. Satellite is absolutely important. It plays a tremendous role, but it also does speak to the fact that satellites are also used by military and or civilian commercial purposes, right? It's a question of how you structure it in appropriate way that meets the defense requirements, and that's why it's important to have those conversations with the defense sector to understand what they need and how to design the networks in a way that meets their requirements, and the protocols that are often needed in place. You can't just always presume, that the infrastructure is going to meet the higher level requirements. Like a telephone is a telephone, absolutely great. But if you're in the world of security, that there are certain additional sort of elements with respect to hardware and or software and or location that military, is going to require. So that's why you need to have those conversations, with them early on. You can't just presume. Yes, it may have some utility, for security and defense, but not at the level needed or necessary. So just saying that, this project, meets national security requirements, and you've never talked to D&D or DRDC or CSIS or anyone, it's not good enough.
And I agree with you, Madeleine. I just want to add here, because I thought about that interoperability or that dual use, emergency response, for example, that is enhanced by digitizing the environment. Navigational and logistic challenges are easier to meet, right? When you're doing that, you can now see how the ice moves through and when that track is going to be clear for ships to transit and so on and so forth. And it also serves the military purpose. Then situational awareness is enhanced. We call it marine domain awareness in our environment, but it is a same word that is used in different formats. There's an example of enhanced maritime safety awareness system that is incorporated on the west coast of Canada. So all indigenous nations have access to this free data that the Canadian Coast Guard has implemented, which allows them to do search and rescue, emergency response, helps them really take ownership of their waters.
Picking up on our previous discussion, Lyle, you kind of touched on the idea of Indigenous data sovereignty and the idea of Indigenous communities having control over our own data. How do you see the Canadian government making space for this type of self-determination, and while also making sure that the country as a whole is secure and protecting its digital infrastructure for national defense? Do you see a model for shared data sovereignty?
Federal investment is always needed in regards to projects like this, right? But data sovereignty must remain always and will be Indigenous. Federal investment, it's a national responsibility. For us to build this infrastructure and the backbone in the data center, is a nation building project. The North is strategically vital to Canada's sovereignty, military, economically, environmentally. Without our, federal investment, the North will remain digitally isolated and vulnerable to, outages and dependent on, single provider. Federal investment, ensures redundancy for military, RCMP, emergency communications, affordable, reliable alternatives other than, for businesses and residential customers. But at the same time, to get back to your question was that, data sovereignty, why it must stay Indigenous is that, while Canada must invest, I'm not asking them, but it cannot mean Canada takes control of Indigenous data sovereignty. Indigenous data sovereignty is stronger than Canadian data sovereignty because it operates under dual protections. And those dual protections is the Canadian law and Indigenous jurisdiction protected by Section 35 rights. And so therefore enforcing, principles like OCAP, ownership and control and access and possession, which are stricter, than Canada's privacy frameworks. And so therefore aligns with UNDRIP Articles 31, which guarantees Indigenous peoples and the rights to control their own knowledge and data. And basically the danger of federal control is that if Canada gains the direct control of our Indigenous data, data exploitations rise, risk rises such as cultural, health, resource data, can be shared without consent. Foreign exposure increases. Canadian agencies share intelligence with US government and allies, meaning that data could still fall under the US Cloud Act. And also trust is broken. Indigenous communities expect Indigenous-led governance and not federal surveillance. And so therefore it would amount to digital colonialism. And so the repeating past mistakes where Indigenous lands and resources were taken under the banner of national interest, we're going to do the same damn thing again with them, under the guise of let's be friends. No, I don't buy it. So therefore, we need a right balance. Canada's role is provide investment, recognize strategic importance, yes, of national infrastructure and support long-term operations, yes. But Indigenous role is to maintain full control over our own data governance, infrastructure ownership, ensuring benefits flow to our Indigenous communities. And the balance allows Canada to meet its national security goals while respecting and protecting our inherent Indigenous rights and sovereignty. So that's my answer.
Let me just ask a question then. So I guess it's then you own the data, and then I guess at your discretion, then it's shared. You share it with whomever you'd like to share it with.
That is the new oil.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or you sell it, and you could actually sell it back to the federal government. In fact, so why not?
Yeah, or not just federal government. It can be.
No, I'm just saying it could be any entity, including the federal government. Exactly.
Exactly. Sort of, and a lot of people don't realize is that a lot of companies that, sort of offer a service are actually making more money off of the data that they collect
Absolutely.
from the transactions of their customers than actually, the transaction, itself or the service of the product. So, data is where it is at, and it's incredibly important, who owns it, who accesses it, for what purpose.
And in the future, it is going to become even more important, as Madeleine, you are alluding to, because we have seen how technological advances in the past have exponentially increased in speed as we move forward with technology and AI, which wasn't a thing 10 years ago. But now it is front and center of every conversation. And what the future holds, we haven't actually really imaginatively thought about that either.
Just to give you an idea, our data center, we're proposing as a scale-up data center from, 100 kilowatt units to a 4.3 megawatt facility. And at the same time, when Tulsa Hydro grows an additional 60 megawatts, we want to grow our facility to 20 megawatt facility. But right now, what we're proposing under a 4.3 megawatt facility, potential revenue generation over 5 years of full operation at 4.3 megawatts, we're looking at potential cloud services and AI generation and data cloud services and etc. About over the next 5 years after 2024, not 2024, 2032, when we hit the ability of 4.3 megawatts and then operations after that, we're looking at about $130 million a year just in our data center alone.
And that could be even an under projection.
That's correct.
because what I'm learning is that the there are different types of data centers, and there are the mega power data centers, and now we are starting to have fiber to fiber within, sort of the service within the data center, because, just trying to move the sheer volume of data within even the data center, let alone into the data center and then back out of the data center, it's phenomenal, sort of the sheer, requirement of energy and the digital infrastructure that is effectively going to transform everything. We are on the cusp of another massive transformation that I think most, regular citizens, aren't fully, prepared or aware, let alone politicians, let alone the regulatory system, but it's coming, and it's coming fast, and it's coming hard.
And another thing is we can consider how worldwide there's this drive to create digital twins for everything. You can now really mitigate the real life risk by using a digital twin to test theories, to test the future initiatives. So all those things are coming, and they're coming fast. So it's a matter of really understanding the systems that are going to be involved and interlinked in that chain. How those systems protect the sovereignty, I think, is going to be a very key focus and important for all of us to consider in every decision we make, because the chain is as weak as the weakest link in the chain, right? So whatever that weakest link is, policy, procedure, sovereignty, security, all those things have to be considered as a holistic picture, from my point of view.
And then maybe just to add is that, we and Canada need to remain competitive. And I would say right now, I don't feel that as if, when I look at other places in the world that we are, and the further we fall behind, the harder it is going to be to catch up. So we're not even just talking about, sort of, the fact that in the north and rural remote parts of Canada, which is 90% of our landmass, and where only 10% of the people live, we have a real, sort of opportunity, but we also have a real threat or, risk of falling further behind if we do not make these strategic advancements, because wherever there is those investments and those growths, in the digital energy transportation sector, is where all those power, all the economic power, the political power, every element of, social well-being is going to be exponentially beneficial in those places. And where, the places that haven't made those investments are going to, seriously start falling further and further behind. And there's tremendous risk of that.
That's right. And the types of data centers, Madeleine, you talked about, Icefox, our company, Icefox stands out for two reasons. Why is because, we're looking at enterprise data centers, right? Owned and operated by a single organization for internal use. We want to give companies the ability to become under our protection under data indigenous sovereignty. And also co-location data centers, leasing power, leasing cooling, multiple businesses. We're also looking at cloud and hyperscaling sections of our data center. And at the same time, looking at real true edge modular data center technology, where it's smaller, flexible, and the facilities can be, designed and manufactured and shipped out. When I talk about a 20,000 square foot data center facility, you're going to have to picture it in multiple pods, meaning that 100 kilowatt units that is fully scalable, where we can grow it, shrink it, and at the same time looking at more flexibility in regards to us giving us the technological edge to incorporate new technologies rather than having to build a whole new data center. We change out modular pods as we need them, as the technology changes. And so therefore the data center key benefits, again, I keep talking about indigenous owned its sovereignty, powered by hydro and renewable services. We're looking at a tier 3 equivalent modular design. Within strategic locations, a strategic location in Canada's north on hydro, and the 288 strand fiber optic backbone is a game changer for high capacity networks. Dual use infrastructure supports both civilian broadband and strategic security communications. And this kickstart of our project, we're just initially lighting 4 strands. That's it for ourselves. The other, which leaves 284 strands as capacity for future leasing, dark fiber, lit fiber to telecoms, government, ISPs, and cloud providers. But at the same time, this is a build one, scale later approach. where we ensure cost efficiency, long-term revenue growth, and market leverage, where we access capacity, introduce real competition, and at the same time, we're combining benefits of both fiber and data center technology in the north. And no one else is doing what we're doing.
Because if you don't model this way, you can shut out, the ability to scale up. So when I look at the first fiber optic, link network that Greenland, built from Nuuk down to Newfoundland, their branching units were not put on. That would have allowed Nunavut, Nunavik, and Labrador to be connected. And those are, they were only about $1 million each, which sounds like a lot, but in the grand scale of, the cost of a $200+ million sort of infrastructure, it prevented that further scalability. So, and it can cost a lot more, or it could be
Absolutely.
impossible. So, it's about understanding what is needed now, but it's also about
Exactly.
future-proofing, the opportunity of that infrastructure to be scaled, to expand in the future.
Exactly. And if we're building new infrastructure in the north now, to not build it future-proofed where it is going to be smart and censored and connected, is the cost then of doing this later, or to what end, are astronomical. And I'm also, it's interesting because we haven't had really any kind of national discussion on this as I see it. But let's say we're able to collect all the data that we could be collecting out of the north. I feel that the value potential there, it's real, it's normal, it could be huge. And I wonder if this is actually a bit of the kind of the cash cow of the north that is not discussed, because we usually refer to kind of like shipping, mining, and these kind of things. In terms of then even being a data broker. And I have a question about that. And I wonder also in this context, if we're able to have a conversation about this that's not seemed as one that's pie in the sky thinking, could this then contribute to trying to support a business case for the infrastructure that we need in the north? Because we know that the infrastructure that we need is going to be extremely expensive. It costs exponentially more than anywhere else in Canada, and it becomes then that issue where it's like, oh, well, we can only do one thing maybe because it's just so expensive and we have things to do all over Canada. And I'm just wondering if there's a discussion we need to have, a strategy maybe about data, and this idea about data being the opportunities there in terms of data brokers, and Canada being a data broker, and especially that kind of being the North being that discussion, because of the ocean. Sitting on the Northwest Passage, the Arctic Ocean. And I guess I want to come back to the captain, like, is there a discussion going on anywhere about, or do we have examples? Is there a port that actually then is like earning money and through its data collection and selling it? Do we have any examples in Canada?
Doctor, we tried to do that when I was speaking about EMSA, Enhanced Maritime Safety Awareness. That system was created in Nanaimo Port Authority as Marine Domain Awareness. My predecessors, they were visionaries, and they were thinking, and I obviously I stand on shoulders of giants. So they did think of all those things, and there is currency in that thought process, because that is what is going to really make this data sustainable process to come to life. It has commercial value. Shipping companies, like I said, insurers, research institutes all around the world are looking at that, and I'm sure those discussions are happening around the board tables in terms of where the future is going to be, and they're forecasting how many ships are going to be deploying on those routes. Right. And therefore, that data is going to become very important currency moving forward. It will be the gold of today. How the gold is up in value because money is decreasing in value due to all the instability we're seeing in the geopolitics here. It's the same thing that is happening in the Arctic, and it's happening at a big scale. All these countries have interest in moving supply chains faster because that's where the money is, and that money is available to us as a data sovereign nation if we are able to get to the finish line first before others, such as Russia, America. Everybody's looking at it.
Which is a perfect segue in line with thinking about how much about the time here. Why don't I just, we can do a little round of a wrap up very quickly. Quickly, Madeleine. A simple question, just a simple piece. I think we all can say the same thing, right? So in Canada, the discussion, I don't think it ever is about whether Canada can do big things. The question is always that we ask ourselves, okay, but do we have the will? And so we're at this point right now. There's going to be money spent. There's going to be a lot of money spent on all areas. It's economic and defense infrastructure that's going to, it needs to also then support communities in different ways. Okay, so that said, and in the times that we live in, the geopolitical reality of what we live in, are you optimistic about the future? Not about geopolitics, let's say, but about the future of Canada's North. Do we finally maybe have now the possibility to have the national will to take the North seriously? Because so up to now have not.
The doctor, I'll go first and I'll say yes. This is why you're doing Arctic 360 podcast, because there is the will, there is the future, there is optimism. And I'll leave it at that.
So I would add that yes, there is the will, there is, the opportunity for significant investments. My only concern is, are we going to invest it, quickly enough in the right way? Because if we make, big investments badly or poorly, it's going to be incredibly hard to have any of that money, available to actually do what should have been done in the first place.
Final reflection, should we be optimistic? I'm a pragmatic and a businessman. Yes, we should be optimistic. First, for the first time, an Indigenous owned company, like ourselves, are financing and raising capital on their own, to build a backbone for sovereignty in the North. No government investment, no government involvement. We have the vision and the partnership, with NORAMCO and Light Access and several Indigenous governments, and the technology of, building our own network, and looking at, the Icebox data center, we're making it real. And so therefore, I don't see any other location doing what we're doing, in all three territories, without some sort of government backing or federal backing. We've proven that Indigenous data sovereignty is not only possible, but stronger than Canadian, data sovereignty alone, dual protections. And that's the reason why we got the investment that we gotten, was the fact that we were able to prove to our investors that, this thing really exists and why we should get the money. The most importantly, we need to know that Icebox can, and, it is self-funding economic generation engine. We will use and build out broadband data infrastructure across the North, without, government subsidies. And, we have that ability to do that once we start phase one, which is coming May, starting construction in May and ending at the end of month of August. And so therefore, there's optimism. Not only optimism is not enough. The real questions are, where is the government, where's the government investment, right? What Madeleine is talking about. We need to see reconciliation, data sovereignty, and Arctic leadership leaving the North to depend on a single infrastructure in the North, is foolhardy and continuously to be foolhardy. The project of this scale requires upfront, federal capital, which we will never turn down. But if they're willing to give it to us, we'll say yes. But at the same time, where's the political will? Ottawa speaks of reconciliation, data sovereignty, and national building. But again, Madeleine touched on, where's the money, right? Put your money where your mouth is, and put the money where it makes sense. Because right now, they're putting $300 billion in LEO technology into a company that they already, like, come on, why give another company more money when they already had, that $300 million loan that they have? I'm not going to say who it is, but you can go look at it. Already had $300 million, not paid 1 cent of that loan back. And then, they give them more money to bring us LEO technology to compete against Elon Musk, because he's a national security risk. But I would say, on that note, that why is Indigenous community still putting up Starlink dishes in the community? Because it works. It's affordable. And, so,
Yeah. I think, it's correct. And I think, it seems like Canada, first we react. We're always reactionary to something else going on, and then we just kind of want to follow and go with whatever everyone else is saying. And I think there is a potential, there's an opportunity here, and it's just, again, it's whether or not we are strategic, think big. We're like, go out on the limb and think big. And so we're actually then doing something before the others, and taking advantage of what we could be doing before the others, so then they can actually react to us and follow what we're doing for a change. And that's what I think we have the potential to do. And I just hope that we can be strategic enough, and focused enough in Canada to do this. I want to really thank all of you for this conversation. I think it's we need to continue this, and we need to build on it. And in February, we'll have our annual conference. And so I hope that can become like an opportunity for us then to pick up where some of this left off, if it doesn't happen before then. But I think there's something real here. There's something tangible. I've kind of been talking about this idea for 5 years and no one's taken it, just hasn't been received in a serious way. And so I feel finally, let's have this good discussion, and the future's now. So it's already happening and it's here. So thank you guys. Thank you all.
Thank you.
And pleasure.
I look forward.
Lyle, Jaiden, and Mishal.
Have a good day. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, thanks for joining us for another season of Breaking the Ice. We're your hosts, Jaiden, Alexandra, Ozma, Michelle, and Sophie, and we'll see you soon. This music is produced by Cat. We thank them for allowing us to share the music with our listeners, and we hope that you'll check them out wherever you listen to your music.
As a reminder, the views expressed on this podcast are the views of the participants alone and do not represent the views or opinions of Arctic 360, the Monk School of Global Affairs, or any other government or agency. Thank you for listening to Breaking the Ice. Follow Arctic 360 on social media to stay up to date on the latest podcast episodes and the Arctic 360 content. You can find us on all streaming and several social media platforms, or you can visit our website at arctic360.org. Thank you for listening. This is Breaking the Ice.